Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. Just want to welcome everyone into our live show, and we're going to discuss and break down and go over some of the most interesting cases that involve police officers from the last week or so. So again, want to welcome everybody in. Looks like we have some of our regulars in, and really curious where people are watching from. Looks like we got Sergeant George in. We got Levi Nolan, who is a veteran ex-police officer. Welcome in, Levi, who is from Oklahoma. Let's see. Barella's from Colorado. Hey, Barella, what part of Colorado? I go up there all the time. Just curious. What part of Colorado are you in? Officer Blue Gun. Looks like we have Officer Blue Gun in as well. Again, all right. Well, welcome everybody into the show. Again, my name is Daniel. Please go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News on just about every channel, and make sure that you follow and subscribe to our channel here, and definitely share it with friends. You know, one of the things that we like to do on this live show is get as many people in as possible. That way we can really have a good discussion and sometimes a debate about some of not just the cases themselves, but some of the bigger issues that ultimately pop up in almost every single one of these police officers. Let's see. Barella says, Golden, born and raised. Awesome. It's beautiful up there. And PJ Smith is from Southern California. How's everybody doing? All right, so before we get into the cases, there's going to be a couple themes that kind of run through these cases that I want everybody to think about. And, you know, if you have questions about these things, or even more importantly than that, you have opinions on some of these issues, I'm really curious about it. So some of the themes and some of the bigger issues that are going to be involved in the cases that we're going over with are women in policing. A couple of these videos or a couple of these cases we're going to talk about, I did do videos on my Instagram and TikTok channel earlier, and people were commenting about the issue of women in policing, also about the issue of whether police officers should wait for backup before they go to a high priority call or a dangerous type of call. And also there was a question that was asked, how do police officers even do this job in far left blue cities where it doesn't seem like there is all that much support for police officers? So those are some of the themes that we're going to talk about in these cases. And that first case that we're going to talk about, so this happened in San Bernardino, California, back in 2019. And, you know, even though, so I've said this before, that a lot of times there are local stories and then there are national stories. And, you know, it's really strange about which stories become national stories. Again, so I follow this, you know, I'm here on Cops and Cons TV, which is an awesome body cam channel on my own. I watch and pay attention to as much of these cases as I can because this is what I'm interested in. And I had never heard about this case, until very recently, and I want to talk about it today. There actually is no, PJ Smith, hey, my nephew is a police officer in San Bernardino. So PJ, you might be familiar with this case. All right, so what we're going to talk about here is this happened in 2019, but the case just went to trial this week, so I think maybe that's why it became a national story. So here's what happened. Let me set this up. In 2019, in San Bernardino, California, a woman called 911 and requested the assistance from police officers because she wanted help. The reason she called, she said that her son, a 19-year-old named Ari Young, that he was out of control, that he was violent, that he was threatening her, and she kept yelling, help, help, that she needs the help of police officers. Police officers were dispatched to the call for service, and, you know, again, this would be something that would be a high priority type of call. Someone calling in saying that they need help in the moment. This is the kind of call that, you know, if available, if there are resources available, police officers are going to be dispatched to this type of call almost immediately, or surely much faster than like someone recovered a stolen car or someone is the victim of an identity theft. Crimes that are happening in the moment typically are calls that police officers are dispatched to quickly. So this would be in that category. So a police officer is dispatched, and a couple of the issues that I mentioned at the beginning, a female police officer, Megan McCarthy, arrived to the scene, and she actually went to this scene and arrived there before any of her backup. So she gets out of her police car and she starts to approach the residence, the woman who had called. As she's approaching the residence, she sees a couple things. She sees the woman run out of the house, and the woman is still on the phone with 911. She's able to hear the woman, and that's actually really common, that people stay on the phone with the 911 operator as police officers are coming on scene. So the woman was still on the phone with the 911 operator as Officer McCarthy arrived on scene. Also, the officer noticed that she was armed with a knife. So it seemed like the woman had armed herself with a knife in order to protect herself. Also, she observed the offender, 19-year-old Ari Young, was also there as well. What happened is that as she started to approach Mr. Young and his mother, Mr. Young started to approach Officer McCarthy in an aggressive manner. As he approached her in this aggressive manner, he started to attack her. He started to punch her in the face. Eventually, the attack was so vicious that she ended up falling on the ground. Once on the ground, he continued to pretty much dominate her once on the ground. He was punching her in the head as she was on the ground, and then in just a disgusting and just a cowardly thing, he was able to take her gun. He took her gun from her. The Officer McCarthy, or Deputy McCarthy, she actually was able to stand up, and she started to run away, basically to go behind her police vehicle for cover, which, if you lose your gun, that's a reasonable thing for a police officer to do in order to try to run to your police vehicle, at least to try to get some cover. As she's running away, he shoots at her. He fires one shot in her direction. Now, this isn't just me saying this. This isn't just the testimony of Deputy McCarthy. This is all on video. Unfortunately, there isn't any body camera video. However, there is cell phone video. So as the deputy arrived on scene, one of the neighbors did capture this on cell phone video. So again, what happened isn't ambiguous. This isn't a he said, she said where we really have to think about or really decipher what the facts are. Those are the facts. It's on video and everybody can go ahead and watch it. Now, other police officers arrived on scene pretty quickly, and they ended up getting into a gun battle with Mr. Young. Mr. Young was not killed. He was injured by police officers, but he was not killed. He was taken into custody, and obviously he was charged with a shit ton of crimes. So here are some of the crimes that he was charged with. He was charged with attempted murder of a police officer, assault with a firearm against a police officer, negligent use of a firearm, battery against a police officer, removal of a police officer's sidearm, and resisting arrest. Now, this is the type of case. Now, if you're an attorney and you have the unfortunate job of defending Mr. Young, everything is on video, so you would assume that this is the type of case that an attorney would try the best they can to work out some kind of a plea deal because, in short, this should be an open and shut case. A police officer was called to the scene. Someone needed help. An officer gets there, not just relying on the 911 call, but the officer gets there and sees the two individuals. The mother is armed now with a knife, and then the individual who is supposed to be the offender, it's reasonable that he's the offender of some type of a domestic dispute, of a violent incident with his mother. He starts to approach the officer and then starts to attack the officer. Again, on video from an independent source, should be an open and shut case. Well, not in California. This was not an open and shut case in California because here's what a California jury decided this week. The two most serious charges, the attempted murder and the assault with a firearm on a police officer, they found him not guilty. Not guilty, so he was acquitted of those charges. The only thing that the jury found him guilty of was negligent use of a firearm, or negligent discharge of a firearm, which is a misdemeanor, which is, typically this is the kind of crime that, someone is walking around and they're drunk and they're shooting a firearm. So that's again, it's not an unserious crime, but it's a misdemeanor crime. And then the jury hung. So of course everybody knows what that means, that the jury essentially couldn't decide whether or not they didn't have enough votes. They couldn't determine on a unanimous basis whether they were guilty or not guilty on the charges of battery against a police officer, removal of an officer's sidearm, and resisting arrest. So the charges that have already been adjudicated, the two serious ones that he was found not guilty of, nothing the state can do about that, so those aren't going to be retried. Obviously, he was found guilty of the negligent use of a firearm, but because he had spent time in jail, essentially he got credit time served for that, so he was actually released. Now, those three charges that the jury hung on, so the district attorney has said that they actually are going to retry him on those charges at a later date. There's essentially a pretrial hearing that's going to be coming up in the next couple months where the DA is essentially going to try to prosecute those three charges. So one of them is a felony charge, the removal of a police officer's sidearm. So at least one of those charges is still a more serious crime. Obviously not as serious as attempted murder of a police officer. So the officer, or Deputy McCarthy, she did do an interview after 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 the verdict came out, and she was on the media the last couple days, and she was obviously pretty shocked by what happened. So some of the themes that we talked about, I'm going to get into those now, but I'm really curious to see what some of your questions are. So we have a couple different comments about how California is a joke, and I'm going to go there in a second, which is absolutely crazy. So there was a lot of speculation about why this happened, and I'll get to that here in a second. PJ Smith says it's sad that studies show only about 15% of shots fired by law enforcement hit their intended targets. So yes, guns can be dangerous in anyone's hands. It's up to you to keep your skills up. PJ, I agree with you 100%. And yeah, I've talked about that before, PJ, is that some people, you don't think this, which is good. So some people think that all police officers are like trained sharpshooters. Not every police officer goes through SWAT school. And yes, even though you are a trained police officer, you do have training, you do have to keep up your firearms qualifications every year. Still, police officers are humans, and how human beings perform underneath stressful situations, and how police officers perform under stress. We know we have science and psychology behind how human beings perform under stress, and it isn't that good. So yeah, that 15% is about right. I mean, think about it. Barney Fife only had one bullet, so he's probably not going to shoot a whole lot of things. Let's see. Yeah, OIS means officer involved shooting. Shaquille Oatmeal says, what are your thoughts on the white woman shooting the black neighbor? Shaq, we will go ahead and get to that case later on. Absolutely. Officer Blue Gun says, what good does that do? The system has allowed them to be free in society, to be re-victimized. Let's see. Sergeant George says the ruling of that case combined with the sense of entitlement from the DA really left a horrendous taste in my mouth. I mean, it was clear that the deputy was doing her job the best that she can. Yeah, I absolutely agree. So now let's talk about under what circumstances, how is it possible that, again, it's on video. How in the world what was the legal argument that made it so the jury found not guilty on the attempted murder and the assault with a firearm against a police officer? So if we're looking at just the lawyering from the defense attorney, it was actually pretty creative. So here's what the attorney for Mr. Young said. Mr. Young said, hey, the police officer got on scene and there wasn't an investigation yet. So essentially, at the time the police officer arrived on scene, there was no reason to detain Mr. Young. There was no reason to detain. There was essentially no reasonable suspicion to detain. Now, I dispute that, but this is the argument from the attorney. There was no reasonable suspicion to detain. So if there's no reason for the police officer to detain Mr. Young, then he has every right to fight the police officer, even going to the point of shooting a gun at a police officer. So that was essentially the argument that he made. He made the argument that because there wasn't reasonable suspicion, no reason for the officer to detain Mr. Young, that Mr. Young had every right to use self-defense and defend himself against the police officer. So I think it was that, which is not a great legal argument, but I mean, honestly, it's the only legal argument that he had if he was going to take this case to trial, mixed with an obvious anti-police sentiment. So, this was a white police officer. This is an African-American suspect. This is California, where it is very liberal, not pro-police in the slightest, or even objective, down the middle, where you can look at video evidence of something and just base it on that. So I think it's a combination between those two things. But let's pick apart that argument just a little bit. So let's assume, let's say, I believe that there was reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. So we have to ask, what is reasonable suspicion? Reasonable suspicion is just reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. It's essentially an extremely low level, and that's all police officers need in order to take someone's freedom away temporarily in order to detain them. So essentially, it's much lower than probable cause, but more than a hunch. So a hunch, I mean, basically when a police officer has a hunch, that is seeing something without any evidence and then thinking, well, I think something's happening because of that. So obviously this is more than a hunch. The reason is because we have a 911 call. So we have a 911 call where a woman accuses her son of a crime. She's yelling, help me, that she needs police officers there. Okay, so you have that. A police officer arrives on scene, and then it's not like you get there and everyone is there and they're playing basketball, or they're swimming in a pool, or there's no evidence of any kind of a dispute. Well, you have the 911 call, and if what the police officer sees when they arrive on scene, if that doesn't match what's on the 911 call, a police officer can't just go and put every single mother and son in handcuffs and until they figure it out? No. But that's not what happened. The officer arrived on scene and was able to see and make contact with the woman who was still on the phone with 911. She had armed herself with a knife in order to protect herself, and then the son, who had been accused of a crime, is being aggressive, walking aggressively towards the police officer. Do those facts and circumstances reach the level of reasonable suspicion? Yes, of course it does. That is absolutely 100% reasonable suspicion of a crime is being committed, because again, reasonable suspicion, it's more than a hunch, less than probable cause. Of course, that meets reasonable suspicion. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense there. Also, in order for this case to go to trial at all, the judge would have to find that there was probable cause. So probable cause, which is a higher standard than reasonable suspicion. So a judge, in order for this case to even get to the level of it going to trial, a judge had to determine that there was probable cause for these charges against Mr. Young. So, but now basically the judge is saying that there's probable cause, and then we have a jury who doesn't know anything. And they're basically saying that no, not only is there not probable cause, but there wasn't even reasonable suspicion. So that's how you know that this is bullshit. And, you know, this is one of the things that attorneys do. One of the things that good defense attorneys do. And, you know, this is what they're supposed to do. The attorneys know. This is why most attorneys, defense attorneys, they want to take a trial to a jury, not with a judge, because judges are smart. Yes, judges can be influenced and they can be biased, but judges know the law, and judges are typically smart individuals. Juries are dumb. Juries are typically dumb, and they don't know the law, and what attorneys like to do is they like to throw as much shit against the wall and hope something sticks. That's absolutely what happened here. So some of the other charges, some of the other things, and juries are paid, you know, $15 a day, so there isn't really all that much incentive to stay there long to do too much. So let's see. Any other questions about this case? Yeah, so this actually brought up a couple different issues. So the jurors are paid $15 a day. And, you know, the best thing that they can hope for is that it's an interesting case that becomes a national story, that they're able to write a book and make some kind of a profit on it, which does happen sometimes. Shaquille O'Neal says, I would never want a judge to sentence me. I would want a jury 100%. If you're a defendant, you absolutely 100% want it to be a jury. You do not want it to be a judge. Because, again, judges are smart. Juries typically aren't, or there's other motivations there. I was on jury. Let me tell you a story real quick. I was on a jury one time before I was a police officer. I was in college, and we got into the jury room, and it was an obvious case. I mean, it was obviously going to be a guilty verdict on like 4 charges. There really wasn't much. There really wasn't a whole lot that the defense did. So it was obviously that this was going to be a guilty. But when we walked in, one of the individuals there that I walked into the jury room with, one of the first thing he said before we talked about guilt or not guilty or any of the evidence, before we talked about anything, he said, I've been a firefighter for 33 years. I'm just about to retire from the fire department. I don't have a whole lot of time. Whatever you guys decide, I'll just go with you. So I mean, my one instance, my guess is that individual, he's not the only person to say that in a jury room. So, but this case did bring up, when I put a little video of this case on TikTok and Instagram, a couple people said some different things that I wanted to talk about and address. A couple people said that this is why women shouldn't be police officers. And I'm just going to go ahead and dispute that. This has nothing to do with it being a female police officer. I mean, if it's a male, if it's a male who isn't in shape or doesn't know how to use defensive tactics, or a male who is just not as strong as Mr. Young is, this exact same thing could have happened. Most of the time when we see officers who get in situations where they can't handle themselves physically, it's a male police officer. So the idea that this is some evidence that females shouldn't be cops, I think is absolutely ridiculous. If anything, I think this says more about the second issue I want to talk about, is should officers have backup? And my opinion is yes. In a case like this, yes, it's a high priority call. You want to get there. However, it is so important for officers to go in with backup, to at least wait till there's another officer. In fact, a lot of different police departments have policies where they say if it's a domestic violence call, if it's these types of calls, that you have to wait for backup. That's part of the policy. And the reason is to avoid a situation just like this. Now, obviously cases where the officers shouldn't wait for backup is something like if there's an active shooter. So if there's an active shooter, someone actively shooting, no, that is the training now is to just go in and engage the shooter right now. But if it's anything less than that, yes, the thing to do is to try to wait for backup. So I'm not sure why she she didn't wait for backup. So that would be my criticism. So if I was going to ask questions about this case, that would be it. Why didn't the officer wait for backup? Is it just, maybe it's the culture in San Bernardino County that, maybe it's the culture that, hey, everybody takes calls by themselves. If you need backup, go ahead and call for it. The agency that I worked for, that wasn't the culture. Any kind of a call like this, especially a domestic violence call, you're going in with 2 officers, again, unless there's shots being fired right now and you need to get in to save a life. Police officers always do that. Let's see. Officer Blue Gun says, of course, most of these cases we see are male because 90% of cops are male. Absolutely. So Officer Blue Gun, the only thing I was saying is that this can happen to men and it can happen to women. I think it's, at least to me, it's not so much that she was female, it's that she didn't wait for backup. Let's see. PJ says, just the other day here in Orange County, we had a male California Highway Patrol motor officer was put into a chokehold by a driver. He'd pulled over and was being overpowered, but some citizens helped him out. I saw that video. That is an awesome video. Yes, Sergeant George says, all you have to do is think of this channel like it's high school. Okay, let's see. Are we talking about the female officer that ended the homeless guy? No, we're not talking about that case. Officer Blue Gun says, we see a disproportionate number of situations where the cops get beat up or are forced to use higher levels of force because they physically cannot handle the situation among female officers. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it with both male and female. Yes, but is this situation where, so what I always say, Officer Blue Gun, is what I would always prefer is, and I don't want officers to use unnecessary or excessive force, of course, but what I would like to see police officers use more is use their intermediate weapons, their tasers and things like that. Use that quicker, so hopefully avoid a situation like an officer-involved shooting. So if the officer was equipped with a taser while he's approaching her in an aggressive manner, that's a time I would prefer an officer to utilize a taser, whether they are male or female. Utilize some of these more intermediate weapons quicker to hopefully avoid more force later on, or a situation where a police officer has their gun taken from them. So that's that first case. Everybody's pretty irritated who's seen the video, and I encourage everybody to go watch it. Everybody's pretty irritated that he was found not guilty. But I think there were some other things that went on there. Jose L. Narwhal says, all officers should ride around with a partner. It works. It's just hard to find police even now. Yeah, that's really interesting, Jose. So what a lot of police departments do is that they don't necessarily have police officers ride in the same car, but 2 officers in 2 different cars, they're dispatched to a call together. So if there's a domestic violence call, even though officers aren't in the same car together, what they do is they send both officers to the call, and dispatchers specifically never send just one officer. So that way you always have 2 officers at a call, but they're not necessarily in the same vehicle. Police departments do this for a couple different reasons. So let me just say this, Jose. So let's say, and they've actually done studies on this about why police departments, cities manage it this way. But if you think about it, if you think about it this way, it's, let's say you have 10 officers that are working a shift. Well, if you have 10 officers that are working a shift in a specific area and they're each in their own car, you have 10 patrol cars that are running around. You are going around the city for that entire shift. So that makes it seem like there's more police officers than if they were doubled up. And then for the entire shift in this area, there's only 5 police cars driving around. So that's one of the, it gives citizens and it gives criminals the illusion that there's actually more police officers on duty than there actually are. So they've done studies on this, and that's why a lot of different police departments have gone to that model. Also, another aside from that is what a lot of police departments have done is they also let officers take home their cars. So that way, when officers are driving to and from work, a lot of times it's difficult, or people really can't tell if an officer is driving to and from work or if they're actually on duty. So it gives the illusion, and also police officers can drive their cars to court when they're off duty. So it gives the illusion that there are more police officers than there actually are, and that's one of the reasons why police officers do that. Officer Blue Gun says, agreed, every unit should be a 2-officer police car. It's safer for the police and the public. Officer Blue Gun, the agency that I worked for, we're single officers in a car, but again, every single call that you're dispatched to, you are dispatched with another officer. I liked having my own space in a car, kind of being able to do my own thing, but still taking calls with my partner who's in another vehicle. I definitely preferred that. I'm originally from Chicago. A lot of my friends did stay back behind, and our Chicago police officers, they ride to 2 officers in a car all all of the time. Yeah, so it's kind of, it can go back and forth between different departments. Yeah, one of the really good movies when it comes to officers, basically having two officers in a car is a end of watch. So definitely check that out if you haven't. All right, so the next couple of cases I'm going to talk about happened in Denver, Colorado. So I know someone in here earlier said that they were from Golden, Colorado, which I believe is a suburb of Denver, probably only about 30 minutes away or so. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's pretty close. Golden, Colorado is also where Coors is brewed as well. So Coors Light has become more popular in the last couple weeks, especially with our viewers here on Cops and Cons TV. So a couple of these cases happened in Denver, Colorado, and it's been really strange a couple of days there in Denver. So a couple of days ago, over on June 7th of this past year, at 4 o'clock in the morning, a police officer was working, and just as part of the officer's duty, he was sitting in front of a hotel. There wasn't a call. He's probably finishing up reports, but really was just kind of in between calls. And even in a city like Denver, there isn't going to be a whole lot happening at 4 o'clock in the morning. So an officer was just sitting there pretty much in front of a hotel. He did observe a male enter the hotel. Now, this male wasn't a suspect of a crime. Police officer wasn't trying to contact him. There were no calls for service about him. Just a random person, just that from the officer's point of view, a random person just entered the hotel. Once the individual entered the hotel, he came out a few minutes later. When he came out a few minutes later, for no reason, without saying anything, he started to shoot and fire at the police officer who was sitting in the car. I mean, that's not a great position for a police officer to be in, because when you're sitting in a car, you have all your gear on, you have a computer. In a situation like that, it can be really difficult to get to your firearm in a timely manner. And something like this, like, you have to do it quick. The officer was shot multiple times. Most of those bullets did hit him in the bulletproof vest, did save his life, which is great. However, the officer was able to get out of the car, engage in a gun battle with the suspect. Both individuals, the officer and the bad guy, were transported to the hospital. The officer will survive. Like I said, his life was saved by the bulletproof vest. However, bad guy did die from his injuries. There still just isn't a whole lot of info, even though this was 2 or 3 days ago. There's still not a whole lot of information about the motive behind this. Like, why would this guy just pick out a random officer who he's not engaged in any kind of an activity that would be offensive to anyone? He's just sitting there in the police car. So what would motivate that? So we still don't have that information. Actually, the individual's name, at least as of this morning, hasn't even been released yet. So we don't have a whole lot of information about that, but as pretty scary and dangerous for police officers. So again, as a police officer, when you do a traffic stop, or you stop a vehicle on a high-risk felony stop, or you go to a domestic violence call, it's not that you expect to be shot or expect to be attacked, but you're not in code red, but you're definitely in code yellow. You're kind of there in the middle. Like, you know that, okay, something could happen. This is a situation where this could be dangerous. I could face some kind of attack. I could have to use some kind of a force. But typically, when you're just sitting there in your car writing reports, a police officer isn't going to be on edge at that point, because the idea that someone is just going to come up and start shooting randomly at you in your vehicle pretty much at point blank range is a pretty serious, scary, and just a really crazy thing to happen. So luckily the police officer did survive, and he's going to be okay. And then about 12 hours later, also in Denver, there was another shooting of a Denver police officer. So again, about 12 hours later, police officers were working, and there was a shots fired call. So there's a shots fired call. So typically what happens there when there's a shots fired call, when there's no specific victim calling in saying, hey, I'm injured, or this is I have the offender here, or anything like that. So when there's just a random shots fired call, typically what happens is police officers go to the scene and they try to make sure everyone's okay, see if they see any evidence of someone who still might want to shoot, or at the very minimum, at least put a police presence in the area. So just like I said before, just put police presence in the area to try to deter any future shootings. So that's what happened here. Police officers got on scene, and they actually talked to one of the witnesses who gave a description of the offender. While police officers were on foot patrol looking out for this offender who had been shooting in the area, police officers located the offender. When they located him, he actually fled the scene on a scooter. Police officers did a couple things. A couple of them actually gave chase on foot. Other group of police officers got in their cars, and they were chasing this guy on a scooter. While they were chasing him on the scooter, he did turn around and he did shoot at police officers. One police officer was shot in the chest, luckily again saved by the bulletproof vest. Police officers did return fire, and the individual was not killed. The individual is in critical condition. Again, there's no any more information about that, other than this is to have two officer-involved shootings where officers were actually shot within a 12-hour period is a pretty crazy thing, even for a large city like Denver. So we don't have any information on a motive or anything like that. But you would have to think that it's more when officers go to a shots fired call. Okay, you have someone that you know is armed and they've already fired a gun. So you know that, okay, this could be more dangerous than that first case in Denver where the officer was, just sitting in his patrol vehicle, not doing anything. But it's good to say that both police officers were safe. Both police officers do have injuries, but they are going to survive. First bad guy dead, second bad guy in critical condition. So those are the cases in Denver, Colorado. Let's see what kind of cases comments we have. Looks like a couple people saying Barella from Golden saying, yeah, I remember when Colorado used to be a nice place. We had local businesses, owners calling the cops on homeless encampment. A guy came out of his tent with a machete, attacked him and his brother. Yeah, that can definitely happen. Let's see. PJ also says San Diego police had an officer shot yesterday, and we have a massive manhunt going down there for the shooter. Yes, I saw that case as well, PJ. Absolutely. Sergeant George says, as if Denver doesn't already have enough problems going on, these shootouts are worse. Absolutely. No, it 100% does. All right. So the last case that I want to talk about it's more of a feel good story. This one has a good ending. So this happened in North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, on May 28th, so not all that long ago. So a couple weeks ago or last week, May 28th of this year. Here's what happened. So an officer, and what I want to say about this is that, a lot of times, and other police officers in here, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of times when a police officer is on the last hour, or especially the last half hour on their shift, they aren't looking to do a whole lot. A lot of times they go ahead and what they call is they go ahead and they put on the blinders, meaning they're not looking to get into anything. They're not looking to make any arrests or to take any calls. They're going to hold them over shift because everybody, no matter what job you do, you want to go home at the end of your shift. There aren't a whole lot of people who are excited about, I'd like to stay over an extra 3 hours today and do a bunch of paperwork. So there's not a lot of people really in any profession that are excited about that. So Officer Wallace, working for the North Myrtle Beach Police Department in South Carolina, she was in the last half hour of her shift. And again, most of the time when police officers are on the last half hour of their shift, they are sitting in front of a hotel writing police reports. They are behind a 7-Eleven. They're in the substation parking lot. They're at the gym. They're not doing a whole lot that last half hour, but Officer Wallace was. So Officer Wallace was on patrol the last at 5, and this was at 5:30 in the morning. So again, most police officers at 5:30 in the morning aren't doing a whole lot because that is a miserable time to work no matter what you're doing. So at 5:30 in the morning, she's in the last half hour of her shift. She is still actively patrolling. She sees a vehicle run a red light, and she does a traffic stop. While Officer Wallace is conducting the traffic stop, she notices that it is a female driver and a male passenger. And she noticed that the female driver seems like she is extremely nervous and scared and just isn't acting right. And that the male isn't looking deadhead straight ahead, not looking at the officer, not looking at the driver, not saying anything, just looking straight ahead. And it was at that point that while she's still sitting there, the female driver mouths to the officer, "Help me, help me." The officer sees that, obviously notices that something is strange, and the officer immediately takes action. She goes around to the passenger side. She has the male passenger step out. She places him in handcuffs, sits him in the back seat of the police vehicle. Once she goes back up to talk to the driver, the driver says that something just unbelievably crazy. The driver says, "Thank you so much." She said that, and the driver was a 29-year-old female, and she said that the male, whose name ended up being Collins Bates, that he had just shot someone, that he was involved in a shooting, and that after he shot someone, he basically at gunpoint forced his way into her vehicle and told her to drive him away from the scene. So she was basically being kidnapped at gunpoint. During this time, essentially, right at the same time that the officer is talking to the female, a bolo, a be on the lookout, comes out over the radio, and as it comes out over the radio, And as it comes out over the radio, the call says that be on the lookout for this vehicle. I believe it was a white Jeep, that there was a white Jeep that was involved in a shooting. A search of the car, with permission from the driver, because it was her car, found that there was a firearm underneath Mr. Bates's seats. And so he had just been involved in a shooting where he injured someone, and then it was an armed kidnapping in order to get away. So that was great work by Officer Wallace. She was actually recognized by the city for that. So that's a feel-good story. That's a really good thing for her to do. Again, as police officers, there's always an incentive to not do anything that last half hour, but sometimes you could just do really good work if you put in that extra half hour, which is really difficult to do. So the last case that I am going to talk about is something that PJ Smith just brought up. I did see this earlier today, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about it here, the little that I know about it. So PJ Smith says, any aliens on body camera? Anyone see that? Was it Las Vegas area or New Mexico? The UFO captured on body camera, and then the 911 calls about to 8 and 10 foot tall beings. All right. Okay. So let me tell you what I know about this case. It is unbelievably interesting. I think that stuff like this, I think that stuff like this is interesting. So here's what happened. And I just saw this morning. So in the last couple hours, I really haven't looked into it a whole lot, but essentially here's what happened is that someone called in to police officers, and they said that something crashed. This is in Las Vegas, Nevada. Is that they called and they said that something crashed in their yard, and that after this thing crashed in their yard, they heard a loud boom, and that they went out there and they saw figures. They called them not humans, they called them beings, like some type of a being that wasn't a human, that were 8 to 10 foot tall, and that they were walking around the yard. So conspiracy theories have been just wild. Police officers get there. Obviously, when officers get there, there really isn't any evidence or anything like that. And the family does appear pretty calm for just seeing what they are reported to have seen. If you watch the body camera footage, at least some of the footage that I've seen, the police officers are kind of laughing and joking around with the family about stuff. Now there was some on other police officer dash cam video in that area. There was something in the sky that happened right before that, or at least that's what the reports are. Right before this call for service came in on police dash camera, there is something in the sky that pretty much lights up and looks like it's going down to the ground. Now, the Weather Society, or the people who manage that kind of stuff, did say that was a meteor or something like that. So obviously there's going to be all kind of conspiracy theories. On the body camera footage, you can't see anything. Now, I've heard that there is actually cell phone camera footage out there from the callers that they took, before police got there. I wasn't able to find, again, I'll be honest, I didn't look real hard because I was looking at the other cases for today. But I did do a quick search, and I wasn't able to find, at least a couple hours ago, though I have heard it's out there, is that there is some kind of cell phone camera footage that was taken by the callers, and essentially that in the cell phone camera footage, at least what it sounds like, that it's dark because this is at night, is that you can see something moving around out there, but it's not great. So again, the family appeared calm. Las Vegas police records blacked out the backyard footage when they go to the backyard. So I mean, every state, every jurisdiction has different laws when it comes to body camera footage. So I think it's per Nevada state law is what they're saying is why they did blackout and redact some of what's on the video. Obviously, that is only going to lead to more conspiracy theories. So we'll go ahead and see. It's just important to know that we do request body camera footage. This is mainly a body camera channel, right? We try to find the most interesting body camera footage you're not going to see anywhere else. But one of the things about Nevada, and every state is different. So one of the things about Nevada is that when you request video from Nevada, they actually charge $300 an hour per video, because they redact videos unbelievably heavily in the state of Nevada, and they charge people. These are public records. They charge people who are requesting it $300 an hour in order to do it. So it's typically not something that we do here. I think it's Las Vegas Metro. That's $300 an hour. So yeah, so we typically don't do that here. But yeah, some states, in most states, it's free. But yeah, a lot of media that pay fees, but not fees that are that large. So it really seems like they're trying to limit how body camera footage is disseminated. But this body camera footage, again, it was redacted. It's pretty typical with them. So if we have anything more on that, we'll go ahead and let you know. So just a little teaser for next week. So the case that I'm following, and I really wanted to wait until the case was over with before I talked about it, but a little teaser for next week. So everybody remembers the Parkland shooting, school shooting over in Florida. So there was a police officer who was on site when that happened. And if you remember, that police officer, he actually did not go. I think his name is Scott Peterson, so he doesn't have a great name, but he's an older guy, Scott Peterson. He didn't go into the building where the shooting was. So, basically he was essentially charged with all kinds of crimes. Because of that, finally now, even though the shooting happened in 2017, he's actually on trial right now. So the trial should wrap up this week. If it does, we'll definitely talk about it because I'm curious to see what people think about it. But his defense is that he didn't know where the shooting was coming from. And so we can get into that next week. But he said that, he's basically he's outside and he hears shooting, and because of echoes and stuff like that, he had no idea which building the shooting was coming from. He was trying to decipher that. That's why he didn't enter and engage the shooter. Obviously, the prosecutors, the families don't agree, which is why he is charged with some pretty serious crimes. So we will go ahead and talk about that next week because we'll be deeper into the trial. All right, that's going to be the end of our show. That's going to be the end of the show. I want to thank everybody for coming in here. I love the comments and the questions. And yeah, please go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News, pretty much on every single social media channel. And make sure that you are subscribed to Cops and Cons TV. We typically do these live shows Fridays around lunchtime at 12 o'clock Mountain Time. So I hope everyone has a great and safe weekend, and we will see you next week.